After far too long without a proper narrative-driven title, MechWarrior 5 Clans brings us another strong entry in the series. There's many praises to sing here, but a few technical issues might have you waiting for a sale. As always, the TLDR version is upfront, with more nuanced takes on specific sections of the game after the fact. In-game footage will be limited to the first 2 planets to minimize the potential for significant spoilers. So, starting off the TLDR version with pros. It's more MechWarrior, so if you like that, you're in for a treat. It's Unreal Engine 5, so the visuals are pretty solid. Sound design is on point and really capture the vibe of our favorite stompy mechs, while also nodding to the soundtracks from older titles. There's a decent variety of mission type. The introduction of the battle map system gives more options for overall playstyle, if you're after more of an RTS feel. The story is a mostly solid representation of the lore, with some artistic liberty salted in for presentation and a modern audience. The characters have meaningful arcs throughout the campaign, and multiple endings are almost always a treat in games. Now, on the other side, cons. Unreal Engine 5 has microstutters, and that's prevalent here. The Steam version is miles better than the Game Pass version, which is multiple patches behind, so if you were hoping to save some money and just get the Game Pass version, you're out of luck here. The voice acting is hit or miss, and some characters feel phoned in. While there is decent mission variety, missions of the same type can start to feel samey and overstay their welcome. While the mech roster is lore accurate for, what we're doing in the game, it makes sense, but it's lame from a video game standpoint. I would like to see more variety, even if it's not like the most accurate thing. The game heavily encourages you to max out your tonnage progression throughout the campaign, which can limit overall playstyle, unless you want to put your try-hard pants on. There is limited replay value here, unless you're okay replaying campaign missions with different setups or starting a new save. And rounding out pros and cons with the meh section, OmniPods and OmniMechs seem to be a love it or hate it kind of thing. Personally, I'm lukewarm on it since my last real exposure to the series was MechWarrior 4. If you have strong feelings one way or the other, know that it's in the game, so do with that info what you will. Overall performance on both the 3080 and 4090 is tolerable. That's nothing to write home about, but consistently stayed over 60 FPS, minus those micro stutters that we mentioned earlier. There is a pretty high density of assumed knowledge that may not be the most accessible onboarding spot for players unfamiliar with the setting, and may require some, additional homework. As of this record, you're going to get a couple to a few dozen hours of playtime, which, depending upon your individual metric for how much you're willing to pay per hour of entertainment, it may leave you feeling that the price tag is a bit steep, at release at least. So, if all you're after is that TLDR, thanks for listening so far. And if it was helpful, do me a solid, hit the like button before you go. That way more people can get useful info without listening to several minutes of some YouTuber padding for time, so even more ads can get shoehorned into the video. If you want a more in-depth perspective on specific aspects of the game, there's chapter markers down below for each section. Now, for the long version. The core gameplay loop is pure MechWarrior. Build out individual mechs in your star, drop into mission, and explodinate or dissect other mechs and lesser beings in tanks, helicopters, and VTOLs while you complete objectives and try to keep the enemies from doing the same to you. Collect salvage, rinse, repeat. There is a decent degree of variety in mission type here, with some quite memorable all-out assaults, and the first mission on the second planet really nails this. Investigation/patrol and stealth runs. As stealthy as giant city-smashing mechs can manage anyway. Plus, worst case scenario, you can always just go all Steiner Scout Lance about it, and, there's no witnesses to report on your activities if there's no witnesses. Food for thought. I do think some of the missions start to feel a bit samey after a while, and it's a common theme for missions to drag on and overstay their welcome a bit. Sure, this fits the theme of an invasion force putting out unanticipated fires and being stretched thin, but from a gameplay standpoint, it can be a bit much sometimes. The AI is fine. Nothing that'll blow your socks off, but most of the time it's tolerable. Enemies do lean a bit towards the, go for face all the time model. And teammates seem to have a penchant for crossing into your line of fire, which can be problematic, since friendly fire is a thing. I did run into a couple spots where the enemy AI bugged out and just stood there, but I wasn't complaining at the time, given the state of my mech. There are some significant limits to replayability, since unless I'm missing something obvious, your options are either the sim pod to replay campaign missions, or starting a new save. Admittedly, this isn't the worst thing in the world, since I'd much rather have a carefully curated narrative experience over Mercenaries' procedural generation, but it might play into your purchase decisions. The controls feel nice, although I did play with classic controls on mouse and keyboard. I hear the controller version is good and can feel like a modern FPS or Mech Assault, which aren't the worst thing if the classic controls aren't your cup of tea. As of recording, there is or will shortly be a patch for more joystick support, but right now I don't have the time to go sort through a HOTAS mapping file to make my ancient Sidewinder Force Feedback 2 and pedals work right now. That might be a later project. Hell, I think those things are old enough to vote at this point, so seeing a dev try to put in support, even if it does put the onus of individual mapping on the user, is nice. Although it is a reminder that I somehow suddenly got old at some point. As for the story, this section will be short, both because I want to avoid significant spoilers in a single-player experience, and because when the mid-90s sorting hat for prepubescent nerd boys came around and presented the options of Warhammer, Battletech, or Magic the Gathering, I threw in with 40k, so my knowledge of the setting is relatively surface level. Speaking of, if anyone knows a Luton grade creator for Battletech lore, drop it in the comments, please. I need to fill this gap of knowledge or it's going to bug me. And since a good chunk of y'all wound up on the channel from the Space Marine 2 coverage, I imagine a primer would help everybody out here. Yeah, in fact, let's take it one step further here and extend olive branches between the fandoms. Night Lords or Smoke Jaguar? Who does war crimes better? Admittedly, better feels like a weird word to use there, but discuss. The story overall is solid, with meaningful progression of character arcs and a narrative thread that stays reasonably on point for the duration of the game and both endings. Lore nerds will be mostly satisfied with the depth of references and attention to detail, although I am a bit surprised at the sudden invention of artificial gravity on ships for presentation's sake. This cuts both ways, though, and the degree of assumed knowledge or suspension of disbelief required could be a heavy lift for newcomers to the series. Voice acting spans the spectrum of performance quality. Most of the characters are well done, but several feel out of place. Either they're disjointed from broader conversation, feel phoned in, or in some places, let's go with problematically stereotypical. The first planet feels like an extended tutorial, which isn't the worst thing in light of all the depth of the game, and things really kick into high gear starting on the second planet, with that first mission really playing the hits. As for graphics and performance, as I said in the TLDR, it's Unreal Engine 5, so that comes with all the pros and cons baked in. The Steam version has a couple hotfixes the Game Pass version lacks, but that's to be expected with those services at this point. I tested the game on my new system with a 7800X3D 4090 combo, as well as my older rig with a 3080 and a wicked CPU bottleneck. Both perform tolerably, with some tweaks to the graphics and turning off control flow guards specifically for the MechWarrior executable. Thankfully, the Steam version also comes with DLSS 3 support, but you could also get by with injecting frame generation with lossless scaling off of Steam. FPS stayed comfortably over 60 FPS on both systems, but regardless of your setup, I'd recommend dropping some of the more resource-intensive settings. I'm looking at you, Shadows. All that said, UE5 has microstutters on asset and shader loading. You really can't get around it. Devs can work to minimize this, but it seems to always be present in some form or another in anything using the engine. Admittedly, I'm perhaps more sensitive to it than many, and in testing both versions of the title, the Game Pass for PC version was unplayably bad in this regard. Steam is better, but it is still noticeable enough to be an annoyance. I really think we need to see some meaningful competition to Unreal in this space, because the sheer amount of games that are built on it, it's a problem. Gameplay-wise, I do feel like there could stand to be a bit more visual feedback on enemy hit and flare for some of the weapons, but that isn't enough to be more than a minor personal annoyance. I do miss the old effects on the Gauss rifle, though I imagine a good chunk of that is my brain upscaling the resolution in memory versus what actually existed on screen. Let me just lead the sound design section with this.
Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Jaguar actual.
Just immediately hit in the nostalgia feels on that very first real mission. Really, we could end the section there. Sounds are solid. Mechs go stomp, lasers go whoosh. It's good. Standout to me is really the soundtrack, which feels like a return to form, and like it would fit perfectly in 2, 3, or Pirate's Moon. May not be to everyone's taste, but I like it. In addition to the standard expectation of the MechLab, there's additional progression paths along science research for universal perks and salvage capacity, individual chassis XP for each mech for upgrades unique to that unit, and pilot progression for each member of your star. Admittedly, this felt mostly like a chore to me, since I'm generally not a fan of micro percentages, and it was really kind of difficult to get excited about a 5% boost to ER laser range at that first level. Pilot-wise, I'd started by just dumping all the XP I gathered into the evasion skill until rank 4 for everyone, since each rank gave an additive 15% chance to just avoid damage, and the survivability appeared to drastically outweigh the other options. Maybe I just don't enjoy this degree of granularity and min-maxing anymore. Might be right up your alley, though. I did notice throughout my playthrough that you're pretty heavily incentivized to max out tonnage for the specific mission you're about to drop into, which could be unfortunate news for fans of light mechs. It might be possible to really lean into a skirmisher-style commander light mech and take a far more active role in micromanaging your teammates' actions, but that kind of seems like signing up for Dark Souls difficulty when, contrasted with the option of building the biggest, stompiest thing possible and strapping irresponsible amounts of fuck you to it. Overall, the game feels like a MechWarrior title should. It's weighty once you get past light mechs. It's impactful, and with just enough modern polish to keep things interesting while delivering a hefty dose of nostalgia for old pilots. Really, it's a must-play for Battletech nerds, but if you're new to the series or aren't sure about your rig, you might want to wait a bit for patches and a discount. Either way, I'd recommend shelling out for the Steam version, since that will always be more up-to-date than Game Pass, which could introduce unnecessary frustration to your life. Plus, Steam comes with the opportunity to add mods once mod support is released in 2025. But I'm curious what you think. Have you played the game already? And maybe I'm missing something entirely obvious. You agree or disagree with some of the points I've made? Let us know down in the comments. I've been Bald Squid. I'll see you next time.